Whatever happened to the Sears wish book? The sleepy American. Before we begin, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city and country or state in the comments. I love seeing how far our sleepy little journeys travel. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and let's gently turn the pages of a memory many of us still carry in our hands. The Sears wish book. It started with a thud at the mailbox, a sound you could feel through the cold of the porch rail. The envelope stack slid forward like a deck of cards, and there it was. Thicker, heavier, small brick of promise with a glossy cover that caught even the weak afternoon sun. Someone would call out that it had arrived. It never needed a name. The whole house understood. Shoes scraped the mat. The door clicked shut against the chill. That book, densely bound, ink still faintly sweet, meant the season had begun. It travelled straight to the coffee table like a guest of honour. Coats were shrugged off, hats tossed onto the nearest chair, and a circle formed almost without a word. Fingers tested the edge of the cover, easing it open with care, because bending the spine felt like waking a sleeping animal. The pages had that soft semi-gloss sheen that caught the lamplight just enough to make the pictures look taller than life. You could hear the paper when it turned. A hush, a skim, a gentle clatter at the corner. It sounded like December approaching. The first flips were quick, an impatient skimming that let images flicker past in a spell of colour. Then the slowing began. Someone would rest a palm flat against a page to keep it open. Someone else would lean in, shoulder to shoulder, and the catalogue would breathe with the rhythm of the room. Slow inhales, quiet exhalations, small gasps at the sight of a train set with a silver engine, a dollhouse with rooms you could furnish, a telescope aimed at a night sky that looked as crisp as the ice on the window outside. Each picture felt like a promise, each caption, a small door. There was a choreography to this ritual, learned without being taught. Children made light pencil dots beside treasures, hoping that neatness counted toward worthiness. Parents read prices the way sailors read the sea, scanning for calm water, measuring the distance between wish and wisdom. Someone fetched scraps of paper for lists. Someone found a ruler to measure a shelf or a bedroom nook, as though the future had to fit within 32 inches. And there was always the family accountant, whoever kept track of reality, sitting with a quiet, steady gaze, the one who remembered that the catalogue came in fall and the credit card bill came in winter. The book reorganised the living room. Cushions were drafted into the service, the table brushed clear of its everyday clutter. It stood like a tent where elbows met in the middle. The spine learnt the weight of the house. Page edges curved slightly under the heat of hands. The slick cover gathered fingerprints that looked like little maps of each reader's journey. Lamps were angled, knees bumped. Someone laughed at the same pyjamas they laughed at last year. Someone whispered a private dream to a picture no one else had paused to see. Time slowed around it. The television mumbled from a corner, ignored. The clock ticked, its hands unusually patient. A pot simmered in the kitchen, its lid rattling every so often like an extra punctuation mark. The dog wandered through, nudged an ankle, and lay down with a sigh, as though even pets recognized the gravity of the moment. Outside, the air was thinning into winter. Inside, the future was being built in pencil marks and page corners folded with sly precision. There were sections that lived in memory even before they were turned. The toy pages, of course, with their bold fonts and elaborate dioramas, where every figure seemed mid-adventure. The games section, with boards laid out like destinations and pieces set in perfect starting positions as if saying, "We have been waiting for you." The practical sections had their own warmth, soft sweaters stacked in reassuring piles, house slippers that suggested quiet mornings, the kitchen gadgets that looked like they could make a small family feel bigger. Even tools had glamour, photographed like instruments of a noble craft you might learn by spring. It was not only about wanting, it was about learning how to want. The book taught a tender form of patience. You could trace a finger along the outline of a dream and then close the cover and wait. Days, weeks, sometimes months. The pauses made the wishes ripen. Children practiced the delicate art of advocacy, building little cases, pointing out not just the flashing lights but the sturdy wheels, the longevity, the way you could share. Parents practiced the careful dance of yes, and not this time wrapping limits in kindness. The catalogue gave everyone a role in the same quiet play. You could feel the catalogue's weight change as the season moved. It started out stiff and new, pages clinging to each other like a shy choir. Then it loosened in the middle, flopping open to family favourites as if the book itself had preferences. By the time the first frost stayed all day, the corners had softened. The cover showed a crease or two, and certain pages turned by themselves because they had been asked to perform so often. It began as a stranger, and became by degrees part of the furniture, like the old Afghan on the couch or the small chip in the coffee table, familiar enough to be invisible and essential. There was a language to the looking. Someone would say, "Imagine if," and the room would nod. Someone would say, "That's a lot," and the room would nod again, because reality spoke in that same even tone. There were small negotiations, not only between kids and parents, but between siblings, between the tiny nations of taste that formed around robots versus race cars, cooking sets versus construction sets, books versus gadgets. The catalogue did not settle the debates. It gave them a place to happen safely, among pictures that could not be hurt by opinion. In rural places, where stores meant a long drive and the town closed early, the book felt like a front door to a much larger house. It knit distances together. If you were far from a gleaming window display, this was your window, bright, generous, offering everything at once. In cities, where the noise of options made your head ring, it offered a silent showroom. You could wander at your own pace, your own timetable, and no clerk hovered, no neon blinked, no music insisted you hurry. The catalogue was neither rural nor urban. It belonged to living rooms. Parents did their private arithmetic within its pages. A checkbook appeared and vanished. Receipts from last year surfaced from a drawer for comparison. Circles were drawn in the margins, not as declarations, but as ideas to be revisited. There was hope in the circling, but there was also care. The book made aspiration feel orderly. You could see all your dreams on a table, and then you could carry only some of them forward. Choosing became an act of love. Some households kept the order forms clipped to the back like a secret map. Others tore them out immediately and tucked them safely into a cookbook or a desk drawer, a place where important things rested. The paper felt different in your hands, thinner, slightly crisp, perforated along the edge with the satisfying tear of decision made. Addresses were written carefully, numbers printed in their little boxes with slow attention. Even the act of adding an item number was a ceremony, as though the universe tracked wishes with codes and would bring them through the snow by reading those digits alone. If you were small, the catalogue made you feel taller. It invited you onto the couch like an equal. Adults asked your opinion and waited for it. You could point and say why. You could dream out loud in front of witnesses. And when an adult pointed to a pair of boots or a warm coat and spoke in that practical tone, you felt included in the weather of the household. The soft economy of keeping everyone warm and fed and a little bit delighted. Even when the book closed for the night, it stayed in the room like a banked fire. The cover faced upward, a glossy moon on the table. Someone would straighten it before turning out the lamp, and someone would say not to put a cup on it, because condensation leaves rings. In the morning, before school or work, someone might flip a page or two while the toast popped. Wishes, it turned out, made good breakfast conversation. They added lift to the day. The pictures taught you to see beyond pictures. A play kitchen was not plastic. It was a restaurant where you could memorize the menu and serve your brother a perfect invisible soup. A set of markers was not ink. It was night skies and dragons and maps to places that did not yet exist. A sweater was not wool, it was a future winter you could enter warmed, wrapped in colour. The book suggested that objects were not only objects but beginnings. That feeling stayed even after the pages closed. Sometimes it arrived early, before the leaves had fully turned, and the sight of it pulled the season forward by sheer suggestion. A candle might be lit a few weeks ahead of habit. A box of ornaments might be moved from the attic to the hallway, not opened yet, but nearer. The house tilted in the direction of winter cheer. The catalogue started that tilt. It did not demand, it invited. It did not shout. It promised in a voice that could be heard over the radiator's hum. Memory clings to small details, the way one page always snagged on a rough bit of paper and needed a gentle nudge. The way a particular photo spread smelled slightly different because the ink there was heavy. The way the binding made a soft creak if you opened right at the centre. And there were the human details. A grandfather pretending not to care and then pointing to a tool with real interest. An aunt circling something for herself in a comic show of confidence. A mother folding a corner down not for a child's gift but for a little luxury she would never buy and would secretly enjoy seeing someone else receive. The catalogue turned the living room into a kind of time machine. It could transport you to the morning you would open a box with your name on it. It could also take you backward, to other years, other circles, other dot marks beside pictures that have long since faded. When you looked, you were never just looking. You were visiting, you were rehearsing. You were saving the feeling of a season inside an object that weighed less than a baby and more than a magazine. All that from paper and ink, from a book that could be carried under one arm and set down with a respectful thump. All that from a ritual repeated so often that it felt inevitable, like frost on the grass or the long, dark afternoons that make the lamps glow earlier than the clock says they should. The room breathed with it. The house learned its rhythm, and the season, once only a far shape at the edge of the calendar, drew closer each time a page turned. It began with a pencil, the wooden kind, chewed a little at the eraser, sharpened to a hopeful point. Sometimes it was a red pen or a green crayon, with its paper wrapper peeled back like a banana skin. The instrument mattered less than the ceremony. Gather the tools, clear space on the table, and declare, silently or with a grin, that tonight was for choosing. The catalogue lay like a map, and everyone brought their symbols. In one house it was circles, round and pragmatic. In another it was stars, jagged with excitement. Some families developed entire languages. A single circle meant I like it. A double meant I love it. A triangle in the corner whispered stretch goal. And a star nested inside a circle sang, please, please, please. Children learned tactics. You didn't circle everything. That made you look unserious. You paced yourself like a prospector panning a stream, saving the brightest flecks for last. You started with the toy pages because they were loud in your head, but a veteran of this ritual knew to also wander into the quieter neighbourhoods, books in orderly rows, art sets with pristine pastels, science kits that promised volcanoes you could make fizz in the kitchen sink. Circling a microscope said something about character. Circling the giant teddy bear said something about heart. A wise child made a case with a balanced plate. Siblings turned into diplomats and lobbyists. They leaned over each other's shoulders, borrowing vocabulary. We could both use this. We could share. If you pick that, I'll pick this, then we can trade turns. Pinky swears were sworn, and memories of last year's broken pinky swears were gently brought to the negotiating table. A ruler appeared to measure the dimensions of fairness. One would nudge a crayon toward a board game, draw a careful oval around it, and look up to check the room's weather. Another would press a star next to the train set, and then draw a tiny second star like a sidecar, a visual plea for emphasis. Parents had their own marks, quieter and coded. A small dot in the margin meant price okay. A discreet dash along the spine edge meant look for a sale. An asterisk meant check the closet. might already have something like this. They learned to draw circles that looked like a child's, then paused and laughed at themselves, because the point wasn't disguise, the point was attention. The list that grew on the side was soft documents of love, sizes guessed, colours debated, batteries noted with the seriousness of a supply officer. A parent's handwriting beside a page felt like a promise to future them. Remember this, you cared about this, you wanted to delight them here. Erasers did their quiet work. A circle once bold became a ghostly ring, a little cloud around nothing, decisions revised as the night went on and as reason, or a sibling's persuasive speech took effect. The margin became a small newsroom, initials in boxes, arrows pointing across columns, see page 142 in a hurried scrawl, a tiny budget calculated in the cramped arithmetic of hope. 19.99 plus 12.49 plus shipping. Fingers hovered, pulled back, hovered again, the choreography of restraint. Every so often someone would tap the page as if to anchor a choice, then sit back like a chess player and consider the board. Corners folded became a ranking system. A neat dog ear whispered, "Return here." A slightly deeper fold shouted, "Top priority." Some pages wore two little ears, an affectionate overkill that everyone recognised as the work of a dreamer. Sticky notes joined the language in later years, small neon flags that made the catalogue bristle like a porcupine. Each flag carried a word. Dad. Me. Kitchen. Someday. The catalogue changed from a book to a field of signals, a housewide conversation conducted in paper. Grandparents had their way with it too, old school and practical. A grandfather would squint, not at the toy but at the construction, the joints, the screws, murmuring, "That looks sturdy," like a benediction. A grandmother would circle pyjamas with the care of a general planning winter strategy. Then, when no one watched, sneak a heart next to something frivolous. Sequined slippers, a music box that twirled a ballerina, a perfume bottle shaped like an idea. The heart was not a command. It was a wish for someone else's wish to come true. In some homes, the ritual required refreshments, cocoa with a skin, tea with lemon, a plate of cookies that dwindled as the pages turned. Sugar helped decisions. In others, the soundtrack was the radiator ticking and the low murmur of someone reading out descriptions like a sports commentator. Battery operated, includes 4 figures, wooden frame, some assembly required. The phrase "some assembly required" drew a line of faces to one adult in particular, the designated assembler, who lifted their eyebrows in both dread and pride and said with mock gravitas, "I can do it." The catalogue itself they learned to cooperate. It fell open to the toy section on its own, then later to housewares as grown-ups began to dream in waffle makers and stand mixers. It accepted the marks with the indulgence of a grand old ledger book. Ink bled a little and made its own stars at the page edges, imperfect and beautiful. The paper took on a nap from all the touching and grew warmer by the minute. The glossy photographs started to look lived in, not because they changed, but because they now carried fingerprints of anticipation. Not every mark was negotiation. Some were memory. A parent traced the outline of a sled and saw not the sled but last year's hill. The breath clouds, the way a child's laughter can make the cold irrelevant. A child circled an ornament kit and imagined a future self threading a needle, tongue between teeth in concentration, making something that would be unpacked for years. The act of circling became a quiet rehearsal for the holiday, as if drawing a ring around a picture could pull time closer. Certain families had rules: 1 circle per page, 3 stars total, a wildcard page where anything goes. One home came up with a jury of the cousins rule. At Thanksgiving, everyone would get 10 minutes with a book and a set number of stickers, which were then counted like votes. Democracy met desire, and it was amazingly fun, Another household had the sleep on it rule. Anything circled after 9 p.m. needed confirmation in the morning light, when sugar-fueled zeal had cooled. It turned out the morning light was kind to some choices and stern with others. Letters were drafted in parallel, a parallel ritual. A child copied item numbers into a letter to Santa, careful as a clerk, then decorated the margins with candy canes that leaned too far. Parents wrote to faraway relatives, "She loves this, but truly any art supplies. His size is between small and medium. He's growing like a weed. Please, no drums," with a smiley face that read as both joke and plea. The catalogue turned into a shared language beyond the house, a way to help love find its target without spoiling surprise. There were small tragedies and their repairs. A younger sibling's enthusiastic crayon streaked across the very thing an older sibling had championed, and there was a choking sound and then a breath and then forgiveness, because the circle still showed through, and desire is more durable than marks. A cup left a faint ring on a page, and someone lifted the catalogue and looked at the offender with theatrical sorrow, and coasters were distributed like peace treaties. A dog's paw landed square on the tool section, and a paw print of mud became an unexpected recommendation. For immigrant families, the ritual wore fresh edges. The catalogue became a gentle translator. This is the sweater style kids wear here. This is the lunchbox. This is the toy everyone will talk about in school. Circles were drawn with accents and dreams packed from far away. The book could be both a wish list and a study guide. For families with tight budgets, the ritual became a lesson in priority and imagination. Circles were not promises, they were possibilities. The beauty was that even a no could turn into a later, and sometimes, unexpectedly, a yes would appear from a sale page, a discount code from a neighbour, an extra shift picked up, a layaway plan set like a slow heartbeat under the season. Layaway had its own marks, dates penciled beside items, payment amounts divided like slices of pie, a schedule pinned to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a fruit. Each check-in at the store felt like colouring in a star, one point at a time. Parents learned to hold two feelings, the sharp edge of limitation and the round warmth of providing. The catalogue, in all its glossy optimism, played fair with both. It allowed big stars to sit beside tiny dots and didn't insist that one cancel the other. Sometimes the choosing paused for a story. "I had this when I was your age," someone would say, finger resting on a humble metal truck or a sewing kit. And then the room would tilt slightly toward the past while the present waited, patient. The circle drawn after a story carried more weight. It connected a toy to a person, a gadget to a memory, a jacket to a winter that had already been survived. The book was no longer just goods, it was inheritance in pictures. There were households where art supplied backup. When the catalogue did not show exactly the thing they imagined, a child would draw it in the margin, the spaceship with 2 extra fins, the doll with a cape, the castle with a secret door. Parents would smile and say, "We'll see," and sometimes they really would, crafting variants in the garage, adding a cape from fabric scraps, cutting a secret door into a cardboard box. The circle around the picture now pointed to a collaboration. The clock stretched in those evenings. The world outside dug deeper into cold, and the windows became black mirrors reflecting the table, the lamp, the bent heads. The number of circles grew until they looked like constellations. Patterns emerged that no one had planned. A cluster around outdoor things, a theme of making, paint, tools, kits, a streak of comfort, blankets, slippers, candles. The household, without discussion, revealed its mood for the year. One family's catalogue wore the hunger of adventure, another's wore the need for warmth, another still glowed with a maker's itch, every circle a promise of hands busy in January. When fatigue set in, the marks became bolder, then fainter, then stopped, but the talk continued. "If we get this, Where will it live? If we choose that, what do we wait for? If we share this, what rules do we need? It was a civics class disguised as a cozy night. Children learned that choosing is a kind of storytelling. You're not just picking a thing, you're picking a little chapter you want to read together later. A circle was a plot point. A star was a cliffhanger. The catalogue was the draft where the family tried out beginnings. The road to the mailbox could be gravel, red clay, or a scraped line of snow with tyre ruts like rails. It could be a city hallway with echoes and a neighbour's door that always smelled like onions and warm bread. Wherever you lived, the route to getting it felt like a small ceremony. On farms, boots went on and a hat was grabbed from a nail, and the cold met you with its dry, familiar bite. In town, you pressed the elevator button, watched the numbers step down like a slow drumbeat, then crossed to the brass mailboxes where keys lived on a ring that felt heavier in winter. In both places, there was the little breath you held while checking, the small hope of the day. Here, when it arrived out on the county road, the flag on the mailbox had nothing to do with it. But it looked celebratory anyway, a little shout of colour in the wind. The catalogue slid out with a hiss, and the weight of it pressed into an arm that had carried fence posts and feed sacks, and now, suddenly, promises bound in glue. Back at the porch, hands chapped from chores smoothed the cover. The dog sniffed the corners and sneezed, as if even he knew ink meant company. Inside, the kitchen table smelled like coffee and wood smoke, and now, the glossy sweetness of new pages. In the city, it made its own kind of entrance. A stack of letters and flyers, a bill you didn't want, and then the fat book with its heroic cover, so confident it could steer your season. It rode up in an elevator among strangers stealing glances. On the landing, someone said, "Oh, you got it already." Half envy, half camaraderie. Doors opened, a gust of steam heat rolled out, and the catalogue was tucked under an arm with groceries and homework, the lobby's hum trailing behind like a radio you couldn't quite turn off. Distance did not dilute it. Distance was part of its spell. The same red train set lay on page after page across the whole map, across snow belts and citrus groves, prairie winds and salt air. Children in a farmhouse and children above a corner grocery both put a circle around that train and felt utterly reasonable doing it. Pyjama set called Winterberry was circled in a clapboard kitchen far from the nearest mall, and the same pyjama set was circled in a fifth-floor walk-up with radiators that clanged like old drums. Page numbers became coordinates more precise than GPS. "Look at 87, someone would say to a cousin hundreds of miles away on the phone, and both families would bow over the same layout, nodding in rhythm, laughing at the same toy dog with cartoon eyebrows. The routes the book took were their own kind of country. Postal carriers learnt the heft and smiled. Rural ones parked at the end of long dirt lanes, tyres crunching, and honked once to save someone the walk. City carriers worked the steps like athletes, leather satchel biting into a shoulder, fingers nimble from years of sorting. Names stuck. Mr. Earl with the wool cap and the muffled hello, Miss Carla with the quick wave and the band-aids to share when a kid scraped a knee. The carrier who whistled the same tune every day so his arrival felt like a theme song. The catalogue rode with them, binding your house to their route and your season to their schedule. Across the map, the book adjusted to the rooms it entered. In farmhouses with windows that watched a mile of field in every direction, it was the bright city visit that came to you, the parade of fashions and gadgets and toys you didn't have to drive 3 towns over to touch. In city apartments, where the street performed all day and night, it was a hush on paper, a way of shopping without glare and noise, a way to imagine winter mornings without taxis and sirens, just slippers and toast and something soft to wrap around your shoulders. It moved through communities in loops and chains. In one small town, the first catalogue to arrive landed at the barbershop for 24 hours, then at the diner, then at the school office where the secretary fed it cookies of gossip. She's after that mixer, he's after that drill. and finally to the church foyer where the pastor's kids raced to the toy section while their father talked to the deacon about the boiler. In an apartment building, one family taped a sign-up sheet by the mailboxes, and for a week the book went door to door like a neighbour bringing casseroles, picking up tiny grease freckles and a lipstick print that no one confessed to and no one minded. Different landscapes taught different ways of wanting. On the plains, a child circled a snow saucer with the hard knowledge of wind that could sweep the breath out of you and still, somehow, make a hill feel like a carnival ride. In a desert town, a child circled a sprinkler shaped like a flower and could feel summer in the bones of January. In coastal houses, windbreakers and boots held a different logic. In mountain cabins, wool was a love language. The catalogue did not flatten these differences, it threaded them, a single needle moving through many cloths, drawing a seam where far places touched. If you lived close to a store, the catalogue became a scouting report. You circled a coat on page 212 and then, on Saturday, you took a bus downtown, found it on a rack, and pressed the sleeve to your cheek just to see if the picture had exaggerated anything. If you lived far, the picture had to be enough, so the house argued kindly about what pine green meant and whether Assembly Simple truly promised simplicity. One family kept a dictionary near the catalogue, not for hard words but for colour names, as if oatmeal could be tested like a spelling list. Another family kept a tape measure, checking dimensions against the corner by the window where a new armchair might live its life. The sameness of the pages made a new kind of neighbourhood. In a corner of the Bronx and a farm near Sioux Falls, two fathers looked at the same set of socket wrenches and both made the same low approving noise. In a suburb outside Atlanta and a base overseas, two mothers paused at the same winter coat with strong buttons and a lining like a promise. Kids in a fishing village circled a chemistry set with the same careful excitement as kids in a steel town. The room around you changed. The book did not. That was part of its comfort. It held still and let you move. Holiday sounded different in different places, but the catalogue sound was constant. The flap of pages, the tiny drum of a pencil on the table, a soft chorus of oh, and wow. On a reservation where the wind sang a high note through the cracks, the book brought the low hum of options. In a row house where neighbours argued cheerfully through the walls about sports, it brought agreements no one expected, two teenagers normally at odds nodding together at a stereo with two speakers that looked like the future arrived in boxes. In a Louisiana shotgun house, the catalogue rested on a quilt that had survived 3 generations. In a Midwestern kitchen, it teetered on a stack of canning jars where summer peaches glowed under glass, like a memory of warmth that could be unscrewed and spooned out. Language was not a boundary. In households where English lived beside another tongue, the pictures spoke first. A grandmother traced a hand along a bathrobe, found a word for softness in the language she had carried across an ocean. A child translated captions out loud, tripping and giggling, then more confidently, as if fluency were a gift wrapped in tissue paper. Item numbers were a dialect everyone could share. 4-1-2-7-9 became a chant, a code that promised the same dollhouse, the same sewing kit, whether you said it with a rolled R or a long A. There were places where trains still punched through mornings, horn low and tired, pulling boxcars toward distribution centres you never saw, and there were places where the interstate stitched the horizon with an endless thread of headlights, trucks ferrying the season like migrating animals. You didn't think about how it travelled, not really, but there was comfort in knowing that your wish and someone else's wish might have ridden side by side for a while, tucked into the same pallet, passing through the same dawn. A map existed, whether you saw it or not, with bright pins marking warehouses and routes, and invisible lines ran from those pins to your table. People borrowed and gifted the book itself. A neighbour stopped by to borrow flour and left with the catalogue under her arm, and a promise to bring it back before Sunday. A cousin mailed his to your house after he was done. 2 weeks of circles already on it like breadcrumbs, and you added your own marks, layering want on want until the pages looked like a voting record. When it was finally too tired to be useful, some families saved it anyway. It went into a box with school pictures and concert tickets, and later, much later, when you opened the box, you could smell a winter you'd almost forgotten. For some, the catalogue was an ambassador. In a farmhouse a long way from the city, it taught the shapes of shoes you didn't see in the feed store, the cut of a coat that would make you walk differently towards town. In a city apartment, it showed a wooden workbench and made one father's hands itch to plane a board, to listen to the music of shavings curling onto the floor. It put a pressure cooker in the mind of a family that had always done things the slow way, and a slow cooker in the mind of a family that had always hurried. It nudged tastes gently and then left you to decide. The mail days drew a quiet calendar in both places. Out on gravel roads, you knew the carrier's truck by the way the dust lifted and settled. In apartment blocks, you knew by the squeak of the mail cart's wheel and the soft clack of metal doors. If nothing came, you shrugged and said, "Soon." If it came, the house lifted. The same lift happened under a tin roof with sleet pinging, and under a tar roof softening in a rare winter sun. It was a small rise in the middle of ordinary life, which is exactly where most joy fits. And there were the phone calls, the long ones that stretched like taffy over night air. An aunt in Detroit, an uncle in the Panhandle, a brother stationed 2 time zones away, each with the book nearby, flipping in sync to the same page while reception crackled. Page 142, someone would say. The mixer with the big bowl. "I see it," someone else would answer. And for a minute the distance thinned to paper and breath, and a picture of a cake that looked possible in any kitchen, with a steady hand and enough sugar. It began with numbers, tidy and square inside little printed boxes. A kitchen pen, often the good one because neatness felt like respect, hovered above the order form, and someone read the catalogue code out loud like an incantation: page, item, colour, size. The digits marched across the paper in careful strokes. Address lines were filled with a deliberate hand, as if the mail itself listened better when you wrote slowly. The form asked the same steady questions: quantity, shipping choice, payment type, and it felt polite to answer them in your best handwriting, even if no one at the warehouse would ever know you had paused between the city and the ZIP to take a sip of coffee and think about snow. Sometimes the form never left the house because you ordered by phone. The catalogue had a number in a friendly box called toll-free, and a parent would slide the book closer to the phone with the coiled cord that remembered every conversation in its spirals. Touch-tone keys gave small elastic beeps. Rotary dials purred and snapped back like clockwork. A voice arrived on the other end, brisk or warm depending on the hour, and together you stepped through the ritual. Item number? Yes, that one. Colour? The blue. Will that be your billing address as well? You could hear the operator's keyboard, each tap like an invisible clerk walking down a long aisle and pointing, this, not that. When the total came, there was a pause, a calculation done with lips moving silently, a nod that felt like commitment. Then the closing line that lived in every era: "Please allow 4 to 6 weeks for delivery." At the store counter, the ordering felt like church and bank at once. The catalogue desk was a sturdy island with a pen chained to it, and forms stacked in trays labelled in an orderly hand. You leaned your weight into the laminate, the way you did when mailing taxes, and the carbon paper breathed its inky sigh as you filled in the top sheet hard enough to leave your answers in triplicate. Behind the counter, someone wore a name tag and a cardigan, and the expression of a person who could find your future in a drawer. There was ticket paper that tore with a pleasing rip. One copy slid into a file with a soft slap. Another copy, yours, was folded once, then once again, and tucked into a wallet like a receipt from fate. Payment had its own textures. A checkbook opened like a small door to adulthood. Name printed at the top, numbers pre-printed at the bottom, a tiny ledger of your month nudging your conscience from the side pocket. The scratch of ballpoint on check stock felt unusually loud. Money orders were ceremonious, standing in line at the post office. The smell of floor wax and paper, the polite exchange with the clerk, the careful spelling of the payee. A store charge card had heft and a name you could feel through the imprint, and when the clerk pulled the manual imprinter, the slider clacked and pressed a raised pattern of U onto flimsy paper, proof that the future had been authorized. Mailing the form was its own small pilgrimage. Someone licked a stamp and frowned at the taste, or wet a sponge to spare themselves the flavour of glue. The envelope had weight now, a flat seed, and when it dropped through the blue mailbox mouth, it made a sound you could not unhear. The clang of the inner shelf was oddly satisfying, a note that said, "It's on its way." On the walk home, you thought about logistics without knowing the word for them. Big buildings humming, conveyor belts like rivers, hands you'd never meet moving boxes from here to there to you. Then came the waiting, which wasn't empty at all. The phrase 4 to 6 weeks set up a camp in the calendar. Someone penciled a tiny star on a square 2 pages ahead. Kids learned patience like a skill, converting afternoons into countdowns. The mailbox became a daily check, a small theatre of possibility. The carrier grew into a character in your story. Boots on the porch, the flap of the box door, the gentle thud of something that might be more than letters. A day with nothing arrived and taught you how to hold your horses. A day with a postcard taught you the language of delays. Temporarily out of stock. Estimated ship date back-ordered. Thank you for your patience. You learnt that desire could be flexible, that blue could become pine, that the smaller size might actually fit better by the window. Calling for updates was part detective work, part meditation. You kept the order slip by the phone and read off the confirmation number that looked like a secret. A pleasant voice located your paperwork inside a system you pictured as a tidy room of card catalogues, even if it was only a blinking terminal in a cubicle farm. "It's on the truck," the voice would say, or "it's in transit," phrases that could lift a whole evening. If you had chosen store pickup, a call might come, the clerk's voice tinged with triumph. "We have your order ready." You didn't even need the words "good news." You could hear them between the syllables. The day it arrived had its own choreography. If it was delivered to the door, it showed up in a scuffed van or the back of a mail truck that smelled faintly of dust and corduroy. The carrier carried it the way you carry cake. Careful, proud to be part of a happy moment. Some orders required payment upon arrival, cash counted out at the threshold, dollar bills that looked like permission slips. Sometimes a signature was needed, the ballpoint squeaking mid-loop as if even the pen understood the significance. If you were at work when it came, you returned to find the box waiting with a slip tucked in the door jamb, as if the house itself had signed on your behalf. Picking up in stores another kind of drama. You parked and walked past bright mannequins and tool displays toward a back counter where the air changed from perfume to cardboard. The pickup desk had a bell or a polite sign requesting patience. A clerk took your ticket and vanished through swinging doors that flapped like punctuation marks. You listened for the rattle of wheels, the low scrape of a box across a shelf, the muted call, "Need a hand," from behind the curtains of retail. When the box appeared, it was larger than you remembered ordering, or smaller, which was its own surprise, and it had your name in machine-printed letters that made you feel briefly official. The box itself was part of the experience. Tape tugged free with a zipper sound. A knife slid under the seam and barely kissed the flap so you wouldn't gouge the treasure inside. The smell rose, ink, corrugate, a note of plastic or cotton, instantly specific to whatever you'd ordered. Paper filled the gaps, crumpled with a softness that made its way into craft drawers later. Packing peanuts behaved like static snow and clung to sleeves, to the dog's whiskers, to everything, and you chased them with a laugh and a sigh, and later you found one months afterward behind the radiator like a tiny fossil of excitement. Inside, the thing itself waited, both exactly as pictured and entirely new. A toy had a weight that a photo could not show. A sweater had the give of knit and the sound of a sleeve pulled free from tissue. A mixer sat like a promise of Saturdays. A set of wrenches lined up with a precision that soothed. The packing slip rested on top, a pale biography of the journey. Item, code, price, a stamp that said packed by followed, sometimes by a number, sometimes by a name written in a hand so rushed you tried to guess the person behind it. You read it anyway and felt a connection. Brief, anonymous, real, to someone who had put their hands on your future for a moment in a warehouse that hummed. Sometimes the order wasn't perfect, the colour was different under your lamp than it had been in your mind. The size obeyed the inches and not the hope. Pieces were missing, hidden in tissue, or actually gone. There was a separate ritual for that. The return policy lived on the back of the slip, calm, procedural, non-judgmental, and you filled another set of boxes, explained with a sentence or two, made an exchange request. The package retraced its path and you felt the strange satisfaction of a system that allowed do-overs. On the phone, the person on the line said, "I'm sorry about that," in a way that made the phrase sound like a warm blanket, and you believed them because mostly things worked, and when they didn't, there was a way to make them better. Waiting made the thing larger than itself. In the weeks between circling and arrival, it had already lived in your home in a ghostly way. The train set had already run, the jacket had already gone to school on a morning with frost on the grass, the pan had already fried an egg with a sizzle that sounded exactly right. When the real version landed, the imaginary one slid aside gracefully and made room. You assembled carefully, from the bottom up, reading instructions that were oddly humble, little diagrams with arrows that looked like they'd been drawn by someone who wanted you to succeed. Screws located holes, tabs found slots, some assembly required, turned into the satisfaction of "I did this," a feeling that brightened even small appliances. Layaway orders had their own heartbeat. You made the deposit, folded the receipt into your wallet, and visited it in your mind between paychecks. Each payment stamped a date on a card or drew a line through a remaining balance, and small numbers moved leftward towards zero like a tide. The pickup day felt earned in a particular way. You carried the box to the car with a steadiness that came from having carried it in your head for weeks, and when you slid it into the trunk, the thump sounded like punctuation, period, not comma, at the end of a tidy sentence about promises kept. There were calls to relatives in other states who were part of the order chain. "It's on the way," your aunt would say, and you heard paper crackle as you read off the shipping notice like a news report. Grandparents mailed checks with notes in the memo line for the blue one, and your mother wrote a thank you in her even script on floral stationery because the object was one thing, but the choreography of giving was the real performance. The envelope with the note travelled as surely as the box with the gift. Both arrived, both pounds mattered. Shipping charts taught small lessons in geography and patience. A map printed on the order page showed zones, and you'd learned your corner of the country was a 4-day place, not a 2-day place, and somehow that felt fair. The phrase business days entered the household vocabulary and lived there, nudging expectations into grown-up shapes. Holidays had cut-off dates, bolded, and you measured your courage by how close you dared dance to them. Sometimes you made it, sometimes you didn't, and a little card with a hand-drawn picture became the IOU bridge between what was promised and what would be. Even the silence between updates had a shape. There were days you forgot you'd ordered anything, days when life filled in the space with school and work and kitchen noise, then something, a box truck downshifting outside, a neighbour dragging a package up the stairs, The sudden memory of a confirmation number would snap a fine wire in your brain and send you to the door for a listen, to the window for a look. The seasons did their work around the edges of your anticipation. Leaves let go. A cold rain peppered the sidewalk. The sun dropped too quickly, and the streetlights decided it was time, and somewhere in the dark, a warehouse light hummed back at them. Inside that somewhere, you pictured how it used to be done. A person in a canvas apron with a pencil behind their ear, reading your item, number, their cart's wheels complaining softly as they moved through aisles labelled in codes that meant nothing to you and everything to them. They lifted your box with the same care you lifted it later, taped it with the same mutant patience, stickered it with the same address you had written in careful letters at your table. You didn't need to know if you were right about any of this. The image was enough, the chain of hands sturdy and kind. And so ordering felt less like buying and more like sending a message and waiting for an echo. You spoke, on paper or on the phone or across a counter. Somewhere a room answered. Weeks later the reply arrived in cardboard and tape, in moulded styrofoam and folded tissue, in instruction sheets that had travelled farther than you had that month. You cleared a space, set it down, and the echo resolved into a shape you could touch. The tools came out of the drawer, the scissors lay on the table, the instructions unfolded to their full size. The first screw turned. The first page of the manual lay flat under your palm. Certain pages had a glow to them, even under ordinary lamps. They were the ones that always fell open first. The spine practiced in the motion, the paper breaking at the same seam as if it too remembered. You could tell which spreads had been loved by the softening of their edges and the faint polish on the ink where fingers paused. Sometimes a corner bore the tiniest crescent of a thumbnail mark, a quiet signature that said, "Here is where wonder lived." The toy pages were their own country. Whole cities stood on tabletops, tiny streets where metal cars looked forever mid-errand, plastic trees with snow that never melted, a train curving along its perfect loop with steam drawn in white ink. The camera angle always sat at kid height, so everything felt life-size to the person who mattered most. There were forts and castles with drawbridges that looked like they might creak, farms with red barns clean enough to eat breakfast in, rocket pads tilting toward illustrated skies. Figures stood frozen in expressions of permanent possibility, arms always a second away from waving. The captions had a conspiratorial tone, includes 4 figures, real working lights, assembly is easy. You didn't need to be told to imagine. The pictures already whispered the script. Board games were staged like invitations to a night you could join by pointing. The boards lay open, pieces arranged in perfect starting rows, dice with lucky numbers turned up as if fate had a sense of hospitality. There was always a bowl of imaginary snacks nearby in your mind, a blanket already on the back of the couch, an uncle who pretended to be ruthless and then let you win once in a while so you'd want to play again. The best part wasn't even the game. It was the image's promise that the table would host laughter long after the catalogue was closed. Bicycles had their own glamour, painted in a gloss that made even a living room lamp behave like sunlight. Kickstands looked heroic. Seats shone with a firmness that suggested speed. And the little chrome bell, when you stared at it, seemed one wish away from ringing. A bike on the page was never just a bike. It was errands done alone for the first time. A best friend's driveway reached in half the time. A summer that tilted toward freedom and wind. Helmets were shown like crowns, sensible and somehow noble, and locks like keys to a kingdom that was already yours. For some, the dolls weren't silent at all. They had wardrobes of tiny zippers and tiny buttons that felt like apprenticeship and care. Houses with miniature furniture arranged in rooms that trained the eye to love order. The best spreads gave you a whole house plan in a glance. The kitchen with its tiny stove, the living room with a couch the size of your hand, the bedroom with a bedspread patterned like a secret. You'd memorize the cross-section and carry it around, not to flaunt, but to inhabit, so that in school the math problem about rectangles held, faintly, the blueprint of a dollhouse kitchen. Elsewhere on the toy frontier were engines with remote controls that looked like destiny. A plastic steering wheel that put you in charge of gravity for a minute. Slot car tracks arranged in figure eights that made the room hum in your head. The copywriters knew which words caught breath. Turbo, stunt, rechargeable. Batteries not included sat in neat parentheses like a lesson in realism that somehow made the dream sharper. You circled anyway, you could figure out batteries. There was always a spread where the family wore pyjamas, soft flannel, stripes in colours that looked like hot chocolate tastes. Everybody grinned as if they had just discovered the joy of pockets. Slippers posed with a confidence normally reserved for winter boots. The styling suggested a midnight kitchen raid for cookies and milk. No scolding, no crumbs, only warmth and a lamp making a halo on the floor. The pyjamas pages made bedtime feel like a holiday by itself. A celebration you could stage every night without any special occasion beyond being together and warm. Electronic sections twinkled like a low skyline, a neat city of knobs and dials, tuners with little windows lined in numbers, tape decks with doors you wanted to press and hear the click. Headphones bloomed like polished ears. Televisions leaned forward, square-jawed and serious, their pictures calibrated to look richer than your living room could probably accommodate. Somewhere on the page a video player promised to bring the theatre home, and a child or a teenager saw, maybe for the first time, that a room could be rearranged around sound. The description's acronyms and wattages didn't need to be fully understood. Their presence was proof that this was grown-up magic you could learn. Teens found their pages by instinct. Denim with seams that made a person stand a little taller. Sneakers whose soles looked like they could grip the future. A jacket cut in a way that implied you would be noticed without having to try. There were radios you could clip to a belt and disappear into your own soundtrack. Cameras that would let you hold a moment in your palm after it had happened. The mirror wasn't on the page, but you could feel it nearby, approving, as if softly nodding at the version of yourself that might arrive by mail. Kitchen spreads had the hush of efficiency. Mixers with bowls that lifted like moons, blenders stacked to whirl, waffle irons with grids begging for syrup. There would be a photograph of breakfast plated with improbable neatness, and you could almost hear forks and morning conversation. The captions were respectful and unhurried. Variable speeds, easy cleanup, heavy duty. You circled not just the appliance but the ritual it implied. A Saturday with music on low, an egg cracking, a child waiting with a plate. The small culture of a home repeated until it became a tradition. Linens and bedding did a quiet dance. Quilts folded over in corners so you could see what lived on the other side. Sheets promised thread counts like lullabies. Blankets draped in ways that made a couch into a confession of comfort. A photograph might show a child's bed with a mapping of planets or ponies, and you could watch a kid's eyes widen, not because of the animals or the stars, but because the bed suddenly looked like a place you went to, not a place you were sent to. The picture taught sleep to feel like a destination. Jewellery pages shone with a kind of careful light. Rings stood in velvet as if rehearsing a proposal. Watches held their hands at 10:10, a smile disguised as timekeeping. Pendants floated on air in a way that made you understand gravity was sometimes negotiable. For children, these pages were often passed quickly, sparkly but abstract. For someone older, they were plans, hopes with clasps. A note might get written in a margin beside a birthstone ring, not even a circle, just a dot, a private punctuation with a name attached in thought if not in ink. Tools were arrayed like a prayer answered in socket sizes, wrenches lined up shoulder to shoulder, ratchets reclining like they had just finished something satisfying. The copy promised durability and lifetime, a word that landed with particular heft in houses that fixed their own things. a case sat open like a treasure chest for practical dreams. On those pages, mouths formed the word sturdy without sound. If there was a drill, it stood as confidently as any action figure, and kids learned that some toys made noise in a way that mended the world. The gifts under pages under 5, 10, 20 were crammed in a cheerful grid. Stocking stuffers aimed at every age, puzzles the size of a palm, pens with improbable features, flashlights like pocket secrets, soaps that looked edible if you were only half awake. You scanned quickly and then doubled back because something had winked at you from a corner. A keychain you didn't know you needed. A calendar with a picture that set a tone for a whole year. These pages were where generosity stretched itself thin and still held. There were spreads that felt like city windows in December. A living room staged with a fireplace. Stockings that looked as if a hand had just patted them flat. A tree that was possibly too perfect for the world and therefore exactly right for the page. The whole scene was a prompt. How do we make our home glow? Not by buying everything, but by choosing one or two things that pulled the room into focus, that taught the lamp and the rug and the people where to look. Clocks and lamps had a paradoxical energy, quiet objects that suggested good habits. An alarm clock with big numbers implied mornings that began without stress. A banker's lamp, green-glassed and cool, made a desk into a place where thoughts could stack in neat piles. A floor lamp with an adjustable neck looked like the future reading chair had already found its best companion. These pages taught a kind of domestic geometry. Place this here, and the room changes shape. Sometimes a page meant less to you than to someone else, and even that made it memorable. The sewing machines, for instance, with their gleaming plates and tidy knobs, might have looked like alien ships to you, but they meant evenings of careful work to the person who knew how to make fabric obey. A typewriter promised order to a mind that loved sentences. A set of storage jars promised a pantry that would settle a little, as if glass could soothe chaos. The rememberability of a page wasn't just about desire, it was about respect for what the picture meant in someone else's hands. The best layouts avoided crowds, they trusted one good angle. A sled was shown on a hint of hill, not to brag about snow, but to remind your body what downhill feels like. A coat was photographed on a figure mid-turn, fabric catching light like a caught breath. A set of glasses sat next to a pitcher with a slice of lemon in the suggestion of water, and suddenly every thirsty moment in summer wore a different face. There was a phrase cadence you could hear in your head as you read. Includes, features, measures, fits, wipes clean. The simplicity of it made a contract. The page told you everything you needed and nothing you didn't. If it was for kids, the copy had a wink. If it was for adults, it had a nod. Somewhere a person wrote those sentences in a room with a calendar tacked to the wall and a coffee ring on the desk, and their quiet authority seeped into the page until you believed the promises with your fingers. Even the advertisements inside the book, the little islands of cross-promotion, became landmarks. Gift wrap sold beside the gifts like a reminder to think one step ahead. Batteries neighboured the noisemakers, a practical chorus line. Warranty options sat politely in a sidebar, not flashy, but a hand extended across months you couldn't see yet. You learned to appreciate the choreography, the way the catalogue arranged everything to teach you timing as much as taste. And then there were the oddball pages, the ones that made the household chuckle in the same place every year. A novelty gadget that seemed designed for a problem no one had. A sweater with a pattern bold enough to start an argument before breakfast. A lawn ornament that promised cheer and threatened mystery. These pages performed a civic service. They provided a place for unanimous maybe not, which meant the next yes came faster. If you thumbed to the back, miniature pictures marched in an index like the memory of the whole book had gathered for a class photo. Page numbers sat beneath them like addresses. You could relive your tour in a single glance, recognizing each neighborhood by its tiny front stoop. The order form waited there too, perforated and patient, the final act of every remembered page. It didn't need to urge you. If a spread had done its work, you arrived ready. All of this stayed even when the covers changed, even when fashions marched forward and devices lost buttons and gained screens. The remembered pages weren't only about objects, they were about arrangements that made feeling easy to find. A good spread held your hand and led you through a room where your life looked a little tidier, a little warmer, a little more full of games and breakfast and music and tools that cooperated. You closed the catalogue and the room around you shifted, ever so slightly, as if the page had taught the house a new way to breathe. The change didn't happen with a shout so much as with a click. A new remote in a living room, sleeker, more certain, made it normal to jump from one world to another with a thumb. Saturday mornings grew louder, brighter, faster. Cartoons stitched together by commercials where toys leapt, cars flew, dolls blinked, and everything promised to be bigger in your hands than it was on the screen. Jingles nested in your head like birds, and whole aisles were summoned by a 30-second spell. The ritual of circling pages had competition now, from counting down to the end of an ad break, from memorizing phone numbers that slid across the bottom in proud, blocky fonts. The trip to choose moved from coffee tables to parking lots striped like graph paper. Moles rose with skylights shaped to drink winter sun, with fountains that talked in a soothing language of recycled water, with atriums so wide even echoes got comfortable. Air smelled like a schedule. Coffee at one end, perfume in the middle, pretzels and cinnamon pulling you forward as if on an invisible leash. The floor was a compass, terrazzo and tile guiding feet toward anchors that promised everything under one roof and then delivered it in sections named softly like seasons. Home, men, juniors, tools, bedding, toys. Specialty stores gathered like bright ideas around the edges. A place with nothing but gadgets that hummed when you pressed them. A store where every wall was sneakers. A cave of plastic boxes stacked with action figures posed as if frozen mid-heroics. A whole store for games. A whole store for candles. A whole store for books with couches that made you forget the clock. The catalogue's single voice met a chorus, and choosing became an errand that walked. The new choosing had its own music, escalators did their long sigh, handrails warming palms, cash registers beeped in a rhythm that made counting money feel like scanning stars. Overhead speakers offered a soft, unthreatening beat crafted to make time tick in round numbers. Salespeople learned your name from a card that swiped with a small, decisive chirp, and 10% off today travelled like a friendly rumour. Layaway moved to the back counter while store cards imprinted with your future clack through imprinters and then later slid whisper quiet through stripes that knew your limits better than you did. Families reorganized their rituals. The living room still saw the book, but the book now had a car key resting on it. Let's go look, someone would say, and the house put on its shoes. The act of wanting involved trying on. Boots at a full-length mirror, a coat that made shoulders square, a bike that you straddled while a clerk steadied the handlebars like an uncle teaching balance. The box was not a promise anymore. It was a thing you lifted into a cart that had a squeaky wheel and a seat where a toddler turned into a pirate captain, while the grown-ups navigated end caps that shouted today only. Television learned to sell without blinking. Between scenes, a voice that never stuttered told you a set could be yours by Christmas if you ordered before midnight. A countdown flickering in a corner as if the future had an expiration date. Hosts on shopping channels chatted through the afternoon as if you were all at the same kitchen table, twirling bracelets that caught the light exactly at the word sparkle, slicing through tomatoes with knives that would, they swore, never dull, wearing cardigans that paired with everything. The phone number reappeared with the persistence of weather, and people who had never liked ordering by mail discovered they could order by voice live, while a stranger on a screen said their names and thanked them like cousins. Windows in December grew bolder. Mannequins leaned into snow that would never melt. Trains ran in circles in front of glass. Mechanical reindeer lifted and lowered their heads with a patience that made belief easy. Santa moved from the back of the catalogue to the centre of the mall, a throne framed by velvet ropes. Kids rehearsed their vows in line, names of toys like poems, and parents stood in a loop of tinsel and reality, calculating quietly while a camera captured a smile that often looked a lot like awe. The aisles learned to speak in tags: yellow for the bargains, red for the urgent, blue for the calm promise of everyday low. End caps turned into billboards, and cardboard arches announced exclusives you could only get here. Packaging grew armour: blister packs that resisted all but the best scissors, plastic windows that let you see but not touch, colours calibrated to tug a certain part of your gaze. Batteries gathered in tribes near the registers, ready to accompany noise home. Some assembly required now had competition from "We assemble for you," a small fee for the purchase of peace on the night before a big morning. Newspapers on Sundays gained weight from circulars, pages that tried to outshine each other in a parade of prices stacked like choir risers. Families became fluent in coupons, clippers snipping, while coffee steamed. Doorbusters entered the household vocabulary, along with "while supplies last," phrases that drew maps to early openings where parking lots exhaled fog and lines formed in parkers before dawn. Black Friday began to move from rumour to ritual, and the mole, that cathedral of light, learned the sound of crowds that arrived not to walk, but to win. Behind the glass, the backrooms became their own language. Pallets rolled like low thunder. Barcodes flashed and the machines nodded yes. Inventory learned to update itself, shelves whispering when they were hungry. Trucks arrived like tides. The rhythm was not the catalogue's slow drum anymore. It was a steady, clipped heartbeat that kept pace with feet. The miracle of arrival lost none of its magic and all of its mystery. You could visit the miracle during store hours, touch it, lift it, decide, carry it to a counter, and exchange paper for a bag. Teenagers found a new commons. The wish book had trained them to dream. The mall taught them to linger. Benches became parliament. Food courts became town squares where you could travel with a tray, orange chicken to pizza to a shared milkshake, and rehearse independence in sips. Music stores let you sample a life one track at a time, headphones turning the world down to a manageable hum. Clothing stores offered mirrors that reflected possibility in three walls. You could step out of a dressing room and discover that yes, it worked. You were in there, different and yet exactly yourself. Not everything sped up. Some parts grew gentler with choice. Parent could lay a hand on a sweater and decide in a second if it would scratch. A tool could be hefted, its balance telling a truth no paragraph could. A stroller could be folded or not, wings of metal and cloth deciding, and you could choose a different one without a return label, and 2 weeks of patience. Returns themselves learned manners, counters staffed by people who had been trained above all to nod. Was there anything wrong, they would ask softly, and your answer, whether complicated or plain, found a path back to a shelf or forward to something better. The book at home tried to keep pace. It thinned a little, then fattened in holiday years, changed fonts, leaned into photography that borrowed light from the mall. It arrived with inserts that looked like invitations. Find this in store today. The order forms began to share space with store maps, helpful arrows teaching about a new ritual, where the catalogue was a preview and the store the show. People circled still, but now the circle sometimes included a scribbled plan. Saturday, 2nd floor, left of escalator. There were costs harder to print. The living room circle thinned some nights because practice ran late or the commute stretched long, or the show you like now aired at 8 instead of 9. Attention, once a slow river, braided into channels. One for the screen, one for the mall, one for the phone that had grown clever enough to remember sizes and preferences. The patients trained by 4 to 6 weeks found new work in lines at registers and in finding a parking space near an entrance that didn't require a hike in weather you hadn't dressed for. And yet, romance persisted in new aisles. Winter coats still carried the scent of snow you hadn't met yet. The first time a radio worked in your hands before you bought it felt like foreknowledge. A child still reached for a toy with fingertips that trembled a little, because wanting is physical and always will be. The catalogues didn't surrender, they adapted, turning into wish maps that harmonized with floor plans. The TV didn't erase the living room, it populated it with prototypes of mornings you could try on. Some evenings, after the mall bags were emptied and the receipts folded into a stack by the bread box, someone would pull out the book again, not to order but to compare. The picture and the purchase sat side by side like old friends, and the house nodded at how close they matched. Sometimes the store had yielded something you never would have circled, a colour the camera couldn't catch, a shape that flattered a body the page had never met, and that too felt like a good kind of progress. Serendipity, new to the ritual, fit right in. Commercial breaks taught new dances at home. Kids shouted from the hallway when the show was back, and in those quick sprints, you felt the pulse of a world that moved in segments and bursts. Parents learned to mute ads to catch a thought, learned to let some jingles play because the kids liked to sing along, learned the names of hosts who sold more comforters in an afternoon than some stores stocked in a month. The house became fluent in pitches and in pauses, in choosing when to listen and when to look away. In the midst of all the gloss and glass, small constants held. The pencil lived in the drawer where it always had. The kitchen light still made a cone on the table where choices arranged themselves. The book, lighter or heavier, still landed with a sound that meant the season was near, even if the next step involved a car ride and a list. And when the mall's sliding doors whooshed open and let in a packet of cold air, the feeling that met you, possibility, variety, just enough spectacle to lift a tired week, was not so different from the feeling of the first page lifting under your thumb. It was subtle at first, the way a favourite book gets a loose page near the back and you only notice when it flutters. Costs rose like a thermometer left in the sun, quiet, incremental, until someone at the kitchen table rubbed a thumb over the order form and said, almost to themselves, postage went up again. Ink, paper, binding, the diesel in the trucks, the roof above the warehouse, the lights on in the phone room after dark. Everything had a number next to it that liked to climb. The catalogue still landed with its reassuring thump, but now that thump carried a question. How much does it cost to make this sound? Inside offices where pencils once ruled, spreadsheets arrive with their own weather. Columns multiplied, fuel surcharge, paper surcharge, rush surcharge, meetings stretched. The copywriter who knew how to make a toaster sound like Saturday morning learned a new phrase, reduced by 2 pages. The art director who liked generous white space started nudging furniture closer together, products elbow to elbow, because the book could not afford to breathe as deeply as it used to. The bindery line ran as steady as ever, but at the end of the day a manager wrapped a tape measure around finished stacks, measuring cost in inches. Warehouses felt heavier, even when they were tidy. Pallets stacked to the lights meant selection. They also meant capital sitting still. When an item missed its season, sweaters late into a mild winter, patio sets missing the first warm weekend, everything tilted. Overstock learned the long way to the clearance flyer. Forklifts whispered past with boxes that had been heroes on page 37 and were now shy in fluorescent light. The phrase turns per year left the mouths of finance people and made its way surprisingly to the loading dock. Everyone could feel what slow meant. Phone rooms heard a new kind of sigh. Back-ordered, the operator said, kind, practiced, apologetic, and on the other end a mother who had been very specific about colour, folded laundry with one hand and recalculated a child's hopes with the other. Discontinued, the operator said another day, and learned to pause, learn to offer a nearby alternative like a neighbour arriving with the wrong size sweater and a really good story. Most callers understood they'd been living in the same economy, but the word patience began to feel like an expense you paid in small instalments. Massive stores learned to sell one kind of thing better than a store that sold everything. A place that only sold toys learnt the calendar like a sport, moving end caps like chess pieces. A place that only sold tools taught hands to trust heft. A place that only sold home goods built pyramids of towels that looked like prosperity. The catalogue, which had always been a miniaturized department store, found itself jostled by specialists who could undercut a price and, with a strip-lit smile, tell you exactly which aisle. Category killer, someone wrote on a slide in a meeting, and the phrase made even veterans shift in their chairs. There were weather patterns far from the sales floor. Oil prices spiked and fell and spiked again, ripples turning into waves that rock trucks, plastic ink, and the invisible line that used to connect a wish to a warehouse with less complaint. Paper mills consolidated. The price of pulp learned a new climb. Environmental conversations reached the mailroom. Do we print less, print lighter, print smarter? Recycle bins stood a little prouder. Households that had once kept catalogues in stacks began to stack them next to the back door to be carried to the curb on Tuesdays. It's a lot of paper, someone would say, not accusing, just noticing out loud what everyone could see. Inventory swelled like a closet that kept trying to organise itself. Consumers had learned to want exactness, this cut, that colour, the model with the extra feature, and exactness multiplied item numbers like rabbits. A sweater in 4 sizes became a sweater in 8 sizes and 6 colours and 2 fits, which meant a grid that looked neat on paper and complicated on a shelf. The very promise of choice, once the catalogue's purest virtue, began to argue with the cost of being ready for every choice. A single lonely box in the wrong size on the wrong coast told its own quiet, expensive story. Credit grew teeth. Store cards, once a polite convenience, developed APRS that could gnaw. Interest made a purchase larger and longer than the box it came in. A late fee turned a small thing thorny. Families kept the book but drew circles with different pens. Need got ink, nice got to pencil, someday moved to a list on the fridge where coupons lived on magnets. Layaway, faithful and honourable, found itself jostled by immediate, by store sales promising now, by card swipes that suppressed the sting until the bill arrived like a thud you felt in your ribs. Returns multiplied, not because things were worse, but because expectation had sharpened. Photographs got more honest and still sometimes lied by accident. Lampshade whites argued with wall whites. Ivory meant 3 different ivories depending on the time of day. The return counter learned to hold both gratitude and defeat in a single nod. Boxes made round trips and got tired. The system could handle it. Labels printed, barcodes blinked, but every loop cost fuel, labour, patience, a tiny scrape to the romance. Advertising found new channels that wanted feeding. TV asked for 30 seconds and then 60. Radio wanted a jingle you couldn't shake. Newspaper inserts demanded a price that dared competitors to blink. Later, other channels would arrive glowing in your lap. But even before that, budgets strained to speak in more places at once. The book, once the soloist, had to share the microphone with choruses that sang at different tempos. The brand learned a new kind of harmony and sometimes sang off-key. In boardrooms, maps went global. Manufacturing stepped onto ships more often, sailed months, learned new holidays and port backlogs, cleared customs that had their own calendars. Lead times stretched like taffy. If you guessed right in March about what November wanted, you danced. If you guessed wrong, you had an ocean of evidence stacked against you by the time the leaves fell. The old rhythm, photograph in summer, deliver in winter, turned into a prediction sport, and prediction is expensive when it misses. Stores themselves, with their bright aisles and obedient shelves, were not cheap to keep glowing. HVAC hummed through July. Roofs needed attention. Carpets wore out exactly where the feet turned left. Staffed schedules were a Sudoku puzzle tied to weather and holidays and pay periods. A catalogue brand that carried buildings on its back felt the weight in its knees. The romance of a sprawling footprint doubled as a heating bill. Foot traffic, once a pleasing phrase, became a metric chased by promotions that shaved margins like a barber determined not to nick you. Inside homes, time felt different. The long evening at the coffee table found itself nibbled at by practices that ran late, homework that got longer, a second job that filled the hours that used to belong to coupons and lists. The patience trained by 4 to 6 weeks made less sense in a household run by people who had learned to get news in minutes and pizza in 30. The catalogue's pace, once the pace of a season, became the pace of a hobby. People still loved it. They just couldn't always live inside it. Mistakes, once swallowed easily by goodwill, got louder. A mislabeled price got snapped, shared, laughed at, demanded. An item that broke twice started to carry a reputation faster than a revised version could fix it. The zone between promise and delivery used to be quiet. Now it had microphones. Even so, most days the machine worked, and most boxes arrived with the right weight of joy. It's just that the misses, when they happened, echoed further, and echo management is its own job. The back of the book felt the pressure most. The order form, once a final page that wore a smudge of pride, got crowded by disclaimers and charts and expiration dates, while supplies last hardened from courtesy to warning. Not available in all areas showed up like a small storm cloud over a picnic. Free shipping floated experimentally, taught customers a new expectation, the kind that once learned refuses to unlearn. And shipping, as it turned out, was not free to the people doing it. Inside the call centres, software changed the view. Green screens turned to windows with tabs. Customer histories bloomed like dossiers. "I see you ordered from us last year," a rep could say, genuinely happy, and still spend more time clicking than listening because the system wanted forms filled. Average handle time became a little tyrant everyone treated politely. The human warmth, where someone remembered your kid like the pine colour, had to fit inside targets built by people who measured warmth in seconds and solutions per hour. Even the book's body told the story. Glue lines whispered at the spine. Covers scuffed sooner in mail streams packed with more competition. Some years the paper thinned to save weight. Other years it thickened to signal abundance and the postage bill winced. Household copies wore more stickers. Carrier barcodes, routing marks, address change notes, layers of logistics tattooed on top of holiday scenes. On coffee tables, the catalogue now had roommates, a pizza menu promising 30 minutes, a stack of coupons shouting today only, a thin flyer from a warehouse club selling pallets of cereal you didn't know you could buy in a single shot. Strategy meetings began to carry a tone that was not panic but had its coat off. "Who are we now?" someone would ask, not dramatically, just practically, because the answer cost money. Are we the place that has everything or the place that has the right thing? Do we measure greatness by pages or by precision? Do we teach people to call, to drive, to click? Every answer had a price tag. Every price tag had a margin. Every margin had a neighbour called risk. And yet the core never really misbehaved. A picture, a description, a price, an address, a promise. The trouble was at the edges, the parts that had to flex when the world got faster, louder, wider. The model that once wore simplicity like a good coat had to carry a backpack of contingencies. Weather of fuel, paper, port, competitor, schedule, rate, return. The backpack fit, but it tugged at the shoulders. People could see it when the book arrived. The same smile, slightly more tired eyes. The first time you bought something through a screen, the page loaded one thin slice at a time, a slow painting from top to bottom. A tiny shopping cart icon waited in the corner, like a toy you weren't sure you were allowed to touch. The form fields, name, address, card number, sat in a column as plain as a clerk's ledger. You typed carefully. The keyboard clicks replaced the scratch of pen on order forms, and when you hit submit, the page paused, thinking you imagined, and then returned with a sentence that felt like a handshake. Order confirmed. Email learned a new liturgy. Thanks for your order. We're packing your items. Your package is on the way, out for delivery, delivered. Each subject line nudged the day forward. Instead of penciling stars on a paper calendar, you watched a progress bar crossing little dots like towns on a map. A tracking number turned into a story, departed facility, arrived at hub, processed at sort in transit. Some services added a small moving truck on a map, and you could follow it without leaving the table, the new version of listening for the mail carrier's step on the porch. Search bars replaced indexes. You didn't flip to toys or tools. You typed what you wanted and watched a river of results bloom. Filters sprouted on the left like sensible hedges. Price, size, colour, material, rating. Sorting became a rhythm. By relevance, by lowest price, by newest arrival. The page learned your taste without asking your permission. You typed red kettle once, and for a week kettles followed you from site to site, waving cheerfully from banner ads like neighbours who had memorised your commute. Wish lists moved into the cloud. Instead of circling with a pencil, you clicked a heart, and the heart filled itself like a private signal flare. You could name lists, kitchen, cozy, someday, and invite others to see them with a link that felt like passing a folded note in class. Children learned to add without ordering, to gather without spending, to curate a little museum of hope and share it with grandparents who lived 3 states away. Couples negotiated in the margins of a digital list, an item added late at night, an item quietly removed in the morning. The new choreography of surprise in a household where algorithms could spoil secrets. Reviews bloomed under everything. Stars lined up like constellations you could learn to read. Verified purchase became a badge you trusted the way you trusted a neighbour who always gave you the truth about the weather. People posted photos from their kitchens and garages, from carpets that looked almost like yours. You learned to scroll past the raves and the rants to find the calm middle where the details lived. Runs a bit small, glass is thicker than it looks, batteries included. The catalogue had once been a monologue. The page became a conversation. Checkout learned shorthand. Autofill remembered your address the way muscle remembers stairs. Digital wallets turned card numbers into gestures. Double click, look at the screen, done. One click arrived like a slippery wish. And households negotiated its power. The ease that could turn a late-night browse into a package. Payment inventors found new rhythms, pay in full, pay later, no interest if on time, turning a want into a calendar constructed from reminders and good intentions. Receipts landed quietly in inboxes, their subject lines stacked like the spine of an archive you could search at tax time. The shipping promise changed shape. 4 to 6 weeks became 2 days, then tomorrow, then by this evening, and the map learned the softness of your front door mat. Memberships made speed feel like a utility. Pay once, receive often. Last mile turned into last hour, and new characters joined the story. Gig drivers with trunk organisers like briefcases, bikes with insulated boxes, lockers that lived in pharmacies and gas stations like cousins of vending machines. Leave at door became a checkbox. A security camera chime replaced the dog's bark as the first line of arrival. Returns learned to behave like the reverse of unboxing. A printer coughed out a label, a strip of adhesive waited under a peel. A code on a phone let a clerk scan your problem and say all set without a pen. Some storefronts became return depots for rivals, a polite neutrality that felt surprisingly civilized. The system aimed to erase the sting, instant refunds, store credit that materialised the moment the barcode was scanned. Boxes that didn't need tape because someone had designed them to close again like a good book. Catalogues followed online, first as PDFs that flipped with fake page sounds, then as lookbooks you could shop from directly. Tap the lamp in the photo and it knew its name, its price, its backorder status. Photography learned a new trick: view in your space, and living rooms filled with furniture ghosts through a phone screen, scaled correctly, as if the room had written it onto itself in chalk. You could spin a shoe in 3D, you could drag a paint colour across a wall with your thumb and decide a season in 15 seconds. Marketing discovered the clock. Flash sales contributed a digital drumbeat. 3 hours left, 90 minutes, 15. Countdown timers ticked in sly corners, and households negotiated with them like clever children. Wait for the code, someone would say, and a browser extension slid in like a friendly scout testing 24 codes while you sipped coffee. Cashback portals and loyalty points turned shopping into a small math problem you could solve for satisfaction. Points earned, points redeemed. The quiet game of getting more from what you were going to do anyway. The inbox learned manners and mischief. Morning newsletters promised just for you, and sometimes they were right. Other times they were optimistic guesses wearing confetti. Unsubscribe links lived at the bottom like emergency exits, and filters became bouncers you trained to recognize the difference between deal and noise. Push notifications tugged at pockets during errands. Price drop on the thing you eyed at lunch, your size back in stock, cart still waiting. Do not disturb wrapped evenings with respectful hush when you remembered to turn it on. Small makers found storefronts without building stores. A woodworker posted shelves that looked like patience. A ceramicist listed bowls that had the wobble of hands in them. A soap maker described a scent in words that made you trust your imagination. The new general store was a marketplace stitched together from living rooms and garages and small studios with good light. Shipping labels printed in kitchens. Thank you notes arrived in boxes written in a careful cursive that felt like conversation. The distance between maker and buyer shrank to the size of a message bubble. The big floors learned to sync with the small screen. Buy online, pick up in store became a cadence. Tap, drive, pop the trunk. Curbside pickup was a masked ballet at first and then a habit. A text on arrival, a hatchback lifted, a bag packed with the discipline of a lunch. Inside, inventory systems whispered to each other. A clerk found your item by following a digital breadcrumb trail through aisles you didn't need to walk. The seasonal busyness still sang, but now it sang through apps that kept lines short by moving time upstream. Television's commercials ceded ground to demos that lived inside your phone. Influencers unboxed with practiced hands and told you what the catalogue never could. How the hinge felt, how the fabric draped after a wash, how the toy sounded when it hit the hardwood. You learned to triangulate trust. One review on a site, one video from a stranger who felt familiar, one friend's text that said, "We bought it, it's actually great." The recommendation engine hummed in the background, gentle and relentless, weaving your clicks into patterns it fed back to you as suggestions, like a friend who never ran out of ideas and sometimes didn't know when to stop. Security became a character too. Little locks appeared in browser bars. HTTPS became a silent password you checked with a glance. Two-factor codes popped like bubbles, a 6-digit chorus you typed with the speed of practice. Fraud alerts sent polite jolts. Card numbers learned to become tokens, useful and secret at once. Families taught each other to spot fakes, raffles that wanted too much, emails that sounded a degree off from the tone you trusted, sites that felt like copies made by someone who didn't understand the virtue of good spelling. Paper didn't vanish, it retreated and then re-emerged as a treat. Some brands mailed small beautiful books again, not thick like the old volumes, but dense with care, heavy stock, Fewer pages, seasonal as a postcard from a place you used to visit. They were invitations to the website more than catalogues themselves. A breadcrumb trail with full-colour crumbs. Households kept them on end tables the way you keep a print of a favourite photo, even though the original lives in a gallery far away, for the pleasure of glancing and remembering that the world still arrives in the mail sometimes. The language of the page changed, but stayed familiar at the core. Add to cart replaced filling quantity, apply code replaced cutting coupons, estimated delivery replaced penciled stars. Some parts refused to translate. You still argued about colours in evening light. You still measured spaces and doubted product dimensions that didn't account for baseboards. You still wrapped a gift with tape that found your fingers at the worst moment and still felt the small lift when someone opened the box and said your name with gratitude. Distribution learned to speak like weather forecasts. Delays due to storms, rerouted through hubs, signatures suspended for safety, warehouse closed for a day that belonged to everyone. The system flexed more than it used to, and sometimes it squeaked. People learn new patience in new ways, refreshing a page at 6:59 for a launch at 7, sitting in virtual queues with little figures marching across a screen, meeting scalpers in a digital cat-and-mouse game where captures stood like riddles at a bridge. Children came of age inside this new choreography and invented their own rituals. Screenshots replaced dog ears. Group chats replaced living room parliaments. A sibling posted 3 links with the caption "Top Contenders," and negotiations ran on emojis and bullet points and occasionally a spreadsheet. Digital circles had the same desire inside them as pencil ones. A bid to be seen, understood, maybe indulged. Grandparents who loved paper learned to love links. The phone call on a Sunday afternoon now included the sentence, "Text me the list." Unboxing went from private to communal. People filmed the slice of the tape, the lift of the lid, the sigh of tissue. The sound of packing paper crinkling became its own genre. A box designed well, tabs that tuck, messages printed under flaps, a thank you in a heavier ink, felt like thoughtfulness you could keep. Some packages included a small sachet of air from somewhere else, mountain dry, warehouse warm, and even that moved the room a degree toward the future. The house learned to store recycling differently. Cardboard flattened into neat stacks, air pillows popped with childlike glee. A drawer near the door grew a new category, return ready, things that needed a second trip. A corner by the entry became a staging area for pickups and drop-offs, a domestic loading dock choreographed with school bags and grocery totes. Domestic space adapted the same way it had once adapted to a catalogue spread across a table. Rooms quietly rearranged around the new paths objects took to arrive and to leave. Amid the speed, some slow persisted by choice. A few merchants promised longer lead times because they were making to order, and people waited, happily, for a chair that was sanded last week or a mug that held the warmth of the last Thursday's kiln. The internet, so good at everything now, turned out to be excellent at patience when patience came with a story. You could watch your thing move from concept to craft to box through a series of photos, a little timeline that felt like the magnified version of a tracking number. The old and the new coexisted in the strangest and most natural ways. A parent sat with a tablet open to a page of pajamas, while a child sketched a star next to the screen with a dry erase marker, a circle reincarnated through glass. A grandparent clicked add to cart on a board game they once circled in pencil 40 winters earlier. The cover art updated, but the rules familiar in the bones. The feeling, it turned out, could travel across formats without losing its shape. Imagining together, choosing with care, trusting a system to carry the choice to your door. The page glowed. The doorbell rang. The box lifted. The room made space. The signs were small at first, a lighter thump on the table, a spine that didn't quite arc the way it used to. The book still came, but thinner. as if it had learned to travel with carry-on only. Pages consolidated. Sections that once sprawled now shared space like polite roommates. The toy city and the kitchen kingdom learned to whisper instead of sing. You could feel the edit in your fingertips, the way a favourite song feels shorter even if the chorus is still there. Inside the offices where it had been made for decades, people learned to pack memories into bankers' boxes. An art director tucked away a drawer of old colour swatches and a loop with a nick in its rim. A copywriter slid a stack of headline sketches into a folder labelled Keep. Someone wrapped the studio's lucky coffee mug in the last of the layout paper and set it on top carefully. Out on the floor, the last big proofs were pinned up with fewer pushpins, and everyone stood an extra beat in front of them, the way you stand before leaving a place you've loved, half looking, half memorizing the light. Then came the slim experiments. A mini edition showed up like a postcard from a friend. Heavier stock, fewer pages, a greatest hits reel of pajamas, a mixer, 2 bicycles, a row of tools standing at attention. Instead of an order form, there was a small square you could scan with your phone. The spread still knew how to stage a morning. Sun washed over a breakfast table. A flannel stripe promised warmth, but the call to action had changed its verb. Households adjusted. A grandparent tore out a page to tuck into a gift. A teenager pointed their camera at a tiny code and watched a page turn into a link. One year the pages went fully digital, a flip book on a website that tried to sound like paper when you tapped. Families gathered around a tablet and swiped, and the gesture wasn't so different from turning a hand, a motion, a pause at a picture that felt right. The old ritual adapted. Someone found a highlighter tool, drew transparent stars on screens, took screenshots of their hopes. Circling survived as a verb even when the circle was made of pixels and could be undone with a tap. Print never surrendered entirely. Limited runs appeared like secret menus. Select customers received an envelope with a smaller, beautiful book inside, the paper thick enough to make an ordinary morning feel upgraded. The cover sometimes borrowed a vintage illustration, a train with a white plume, a child in slippers peeking around a doorway, fonts that remembered the weight of lead type. Phones photographed the covers. Social posts bloomed with captions that sounded like a collective exhale. It's back. Nostalgia learned to travel. Old editions surfaced in thrift stores and estate sales, curled at the corners, names still printed on the front in ink that hadn't faded as fast as the decades. People posted their finds with the glee of treasure hunters. 1979 near mint, found between a macrame book and a box of ornaments. Auction sites turned the ordinary into relics. A copy with its mailing label intact went for more than anyone in the old mailroom would have guessed. Comments filled with tiny memories. Page 142, that sled ad. We circle that blender every year. I can smell the ink just looking at this photo. Communities formed around scanning and saving. High-resolution pages were archived like time capsules. You could scroll through entire winters, tracing circles made long ago by a stranger's pencil. Families used them for show and tell. A parent pointing to a toy that had once seemed impossible and suddenly existed again, reissued by a company that learned how to speak to memory. Grandchildren leaned in. The past became legible in a browser tab, furnished with avocado green appliances and shag rugs, models smiling as if they could hear the future laughing softly, fondly at their hair. Retailers took notes. Somewhere, someone pitched a heritage collection, and suddenly vitrines in pop-up shops displayed recreations of the kinds of things that used to live on the most loved pages. Sturdy wood toys with unfussy paint. A mixer in a colour that hadn't been fashionable in 20 years, and, for that reason, looked perfect. Window displays recreated old spreads in 3 dimensions, right down to the tilt of the lamp and the fold in the blanket. People stopped to take pictures through the glass, their reflections layered over nostalgia like ghosts learning how to pose. Toy makers released classic editions with boxes styled after the era when photography was slightly too bright and promises slightly too earnest. Board games came wrapped in cover art that your hand remembered even if your mind had forgotten. A bicycle returned with a curved frame and a bell that had the exact tone of an after-school detour. The packaging carried a small badge, Original Since. It wasn't just commerce, it was continuity. Media learned to wink. Hollow episodes of shows set in nothing in particular time suddenly acquired coffee tables with catalogues on them. A character flipped a page and made a small, satisfied noise, and the camera caught the gesture because the gesture meant something. Newscasts filmed cheerful segments at archives laying out older pages like fossils under bright lights, a curator explaining the evolution of page design the way a naturalist explains the wing. Museums mounted exhibits on America by mail, seed catalogues, fashion books, kit homes. Someone always said, "You could order a whole house," and someone else nodded yes. And under a glass cover, a holiday book opened to a spread that had taught a generation to desire patiently. Wall text didn't try to be clever. It described the cycle, photograph in summer, deliver in winter, with the same respectful cadence those pages had used when they said plainly fits, includes, easy cleanup. There were tiny revivals in living rooms too. A parent printed a handful of favourite pages, kitchen, toys, pyjamas, from a digital archive, 3-hole punched them and slid them into a binder. A wish night was announced. A jar of markers appeared. Rules were set with a smile, 3 circles each, 1 wild card. The family fell back into a rhythm as if they'd never left it. Stars bloomed on paper. Someone fetched tape to mend a torn punch hole, and everyone laughed because even the repairs felt authentic. Charities borrowed the language without borrowing the paper. Wish lists appeared for families in need, quietly circulated in neighbourhoods and offices. The lists were practical: boots, sheets, a skillet, and also tender. One book about dinosaurs, a stuffed giraffe, slippers in a size someone had guessed with care. People claimed items and used the new tools to order quickly, but the choosing still felt like circling. The packages arrived where they needed to, the system now good at redirecting love. At the remaining counters where catalogue orders had once been stamped and filed, people took photos in front of the empty space. "This is where the bell was," someone said, and that they could hear it, a phantom ding behind the memory. In buildings that changed hands, you could still find the outlines, a rectangle of floor less scuffed where the counter had lived, a pegboard wall with a pattern of holes the new tenant hadn't patched yet. You could stand there and imagine order slips sliding into drawers like letters into a post office, the clerks in cardigans who knew December better than most. Designers, newly minted or nearly retired, posted behind-the-scenes stories. Old contact sheets showed toy spreads being built like doll cities, lights hung from rafters with the bravery of ladder legs, a stylist smoothing the plaid on a bedspread until its lines aligned with the grid of the camera's frame. A caption: "We shot this in July. It was 96 degrees outside." You could feel the sweat behind the snow, the craft behind the magic, and the knowledge made the magic warmer, not smaller. Craft classes discovered a second life for the books themselves. Crafters cut last-century pyjamas into gift tags, turned toy spreads into ornaments, laminated favourite captions into bookmarks. Includes 4 figures became encouragement in a novel's middle. Wipes clean became a private joke in a cookbook. Decoupage resurrected 1,000 living room corners, a tray covered in a parade of flannel, a pencil cup wrapped in socket sets, a shoebox transformed into a treasure chest labelled simply Wishes. In some households the term became generic. The Wish Book was any toy catalogue that came through the door, from any brand that tried in December, to gather a child's attention the way gravity gathers leaves. Colourful toy books multiplied, fat with stickers and activities. Children attacked them with a zeal that would have been familiar in every decade. Circles, stars, arrows, initials. A parent sighed and smiled, because zeal is a renewable resource. And this was one of the best ways to spend it. The internet grew little rooms where the past stayed awake. Forums filled with threads titled "Show us your circles," photos of old pages with pencil marks in small hands, dated sometimes by a parent who had known those marks would be interesting later. People asked where a certain quilt had gone, whether a set of tumblers ever returned, if anyone remembered the model number for a train with a silver engine that whistled one perfect note. The answers landed slowly, like snow. Yes, here's a scan. No, but there's a reissue. I have it. It still works. Listen. Retail tried kiosks that looked like space-age catalogue desks, a touchscreen, a stool, a promise that if it wasn't on the floor it could be fetched from somewhere else with a few taps. The old catalogue counter lived on in blue light. Clerks learned to be guides more than cashiers, fingers flying as they searched inventory far beyond their walls. The phrase "we can order that" became less of a consolation and more of a bridge. People crossed it in both directions without thinking about the river underneath. The holiday mail brought small, careful books from brands that wanted to be chosen the old way just one more time. You could tell when a company had hired someone who remembered pacing, who knew that a kitchen page should make a bowl of batter look like a planet and a hand mixer chord fall in a gentle S, who knew the moral authority of a pajama pocket. These books didn't try to do everything. They tried to earn one evening. Sometimes they succeeded. A house went quiet. A circle drew itself. Someone reached for a sticky note shaped like a star and the page learned to carry it. Teachers used scans in classrooms. Price lists turned into math problems. Order forms became lessons in address writing and patience. Children learned to tally tax and shipping, and to write their names in clear letters inside boxes. History breathed. When the worksheet asked, "Please allow 4 to 6 weeks for delivery," a hand shot up, "Why so long?" And a teacher smiled and explained what a warehouse was, what a hub was, what a season used to feel like when time moved in batches. There were years when a brand tried to bring the whole thing back for real, an honest-to-goodness book thick enough to hold a season's breath, and people reacted as if a friend had walked through the door unannounced. Copies became souvenirs as much as shopping tools. Some were kept pristine in plastic sleeves, others were immediately dog-eared, as if to prove that the proper way to honour a tradition is to use it generously. For a month, coffee tables across the country looked like they used to. Paper, pen, a small pile of hopes. The last and lasting revival was quieter. Households kept the habit of choosing together. Screens made it easy to isolate. The old book had encouraged a circle. People rebuilt that circle on couches with laptops open, screens mirrored to televisions, wish lists shared in group texts and family chats. Opinions still bumped elbows, budget still spoke calm, excitement still drew stars. The medium changed its shine, but the room learned how to glow on cue. The season, like a well-loved melody, shifted keys and kept playing. What lingers isn't paper, it's posture. The way a room leans in when a decision is shared. The way elbows make a friendly border on a table, leaving a little square in the middle for a picture, a screen, a box, a hope. The habit of gathering becomes furniture. It arranges people into a circle whether there's a catalogue between them or not. You can see it in houses that no longer keep stacks of mail-order dreams. A laptop opens, a phone screen brightens, or a simple list is read aloud and everyone takes the same positions they once took around glossy pages. The old choreography outlives its music. We keep the pencil marks inside our manners. Circles became the way we speak when we want without demanding. I'm thinking about, I've been looking at, what if we are verbal ovals drawn around ideas so no one has to commit too fast? Stars became emphasis in our voices, light touches of delight we let flash when it matters. this one, though. A family's private legend of triangles and check marks survives in phrases only they understand. Someone says double circle and everyone grins, because that means top priority and it always has. We keep patience like a kitchen skill, the kind you don't name but use without thinking. 4 to 6 weeks taught a temperament that still proves useful when bread takes time to rise, when a garden asks for a season before it gives anything back, when a person you love needs days to arrive at the same decision as you. Waiting turned out to be a muscle, and those evenings tracing item numbers made it strong. Even now, in a hurry-bright world, some households lift a hand and say, "Let's sleep on it," and the room visibly exhales. We keep a sense of measurement that isn't only inches. Families that learn to fetch the tape for shelves now measure days and energy and attention with the same care. Do we have space for this? Means, do we have space in the budget, in the calendar, in our heads? You can see people holding a blank spot in the air with their hands as if they're checking whether a new obligation will block the window's light. The tape measure stayed in the drawer, but its spirit moved to the front of the mind. We keep a reverence for unboxing, not because cardboard is sacred, but because beginnings are. The sound of tape releasing is still a ceremony, whether what's inside is humble or grand. Children learn quickly that paper rustle means new. Adults know the weight of a box can change a room's balance for an afternoon. We learn to save packing slips as little biographies of arrival and to keep tiny screws in saucers during assembly. Now we save emails in folders and screenshots in albums, and we still pour out hardware onto a dish because small things vanish if you don't give them a temporary home. We keep the notion that objects can be chapters. The catalogue taught us to see a mixer as Saturday, a train set as winter mornings, a coat as courage in January. That way of reading remains. We choose a rug because it will be the ground for a year of puzzles. We choose a lamp because it looks like it will be kind to our eyes at 10 p.m. We choose a chair because of the angle it will set in conversations. The old captions, includes, fits, wipes clean, translate into a quiet liturgy we say to ourselves while browsing anything at all. Will it include? Will it fit? Die fit? Will it help us wipe the day clean? We keep a sense of fairness that got practiced on toy pages and grew sturdy in the real world. The negotiations between siblings over board games became our approach to shared cars, shared days off, shared closets, shared quiet. "We could both use this," said over a dollhouse kitchen, turned into "let's alternate weekends," said over a car key. The diplomacy of taking turns with a telescope at the window taught a way to pass microphones, to invite other voices, to notice when someone always ends up last and change the order. We keep the kindness of budget spoken softly. A household that learned to place stars beside prices learned also to wrap limits in gentleness. Not this time stayed in the vocabulary, baked through with love. Yes, if we do this instead became second nature, a way to guard joy from the erosion of guilt. Layaway schedules translated into savings goals pinned to fridges, then into automatic transfers set with the same calm. Little by little, we'll get there. The moral of later proved generous when it finally arrived. We keep small spectacles. The book staged snow on beds and steam above cocoa. We stage breakfasts on weekdays as if one extra orange slice changes the colour of the morning, and sometimes it does. We learnt that photos lie a little and still tell the truth. A sweater can't make a life, but a soft one can soothe a tired hour. So we keep making vignettes, folded blankets, a candle at dusk, a plant near the sink, to teach our rooms how to feel like themselves. We keep the ceremonial value of address lines. Writing to distant relatives about wish lists turned us into people who can write at all, who can put gratitude or need into sentences that fit in envelopes and arrive whole. Now the addresses live in app autofill, but the habit remains. We still say thank you with a note written slower than a text when it matters, and the pen we use is still the good one from the kitchen drawer, checks the person receiving is the good one too. We keep the inside jokes. Some assembly required became a household proverb covering everything from flat-pack furniture to relationships. We say it under our breath the first week of a new job, the first month in a new town, the first year of anything we thought would arrive ready to use. And when the last bolt turns and something stands steady, we say, "I can do it," in the same mock serious tone a parent once used beside a puzzled instruction sheet. And everybody laughs because that line has been in the family longer than any couch. We keep the map of how to give. The book taught gifts as translations. This is you, seen through my eyes. Choosing wasn't only about price, it was about recognition. A person who dearly circled a sewing kit now receives fabric rather than perfume 30 years later, and the match still lands with a thud of rightness. The best gifts still feel like annotated pages. This is the one with the star I've been saving for you. We keep the tenderness of repair. Returns taught us how to admit a mismatch without assigning blame. Not what I thought became acceptable, became grown up. Mending taught another posture, being the kind of people who fold a corner down on a page, not because the book misprinted, but because sometimes life needs a small reminder to check this spot. Now we keep a tube of glue, a sewing kit, a roll of decent tape, and we use them on days, on plans, on selves. We keep the mailing room sense of season. Even without the arrival of a definitive book, some households can feel when the year turns toward giving. Drawers get organised. A list appears unbidden on the side of the refrigerator. Addresses get verified. The good scissors migrate to a reliable surface. Someone buys tape and hides it badly. These chores are the ghosts of old logistics, the domestic cousins of pallets and roots, and we perform them with a quiet pride because running a household is also a kind of distribution centre for care. We keep attention as a family sport. The catalogue trained us to look at the same thing at the same time and compare notes. And in an age of personal screens, this remains radical. A group leans toward a recipe photo, a travel brochure, a budget spreadsheet, and the words are the same as before. Look at that. Scroll back. Wait, show me. If the subject is a cause or a neighbour in need, the same gestures still gather money, time, skill. The radius of concern we practiced around a coffee table now extends down the block and out into the town. We keep the affection for the ordinary that grew when a page made dish soap look like a miracle of modern convenience, and pyjamas look like permission to be uncomplicated. That affection means we notice when the laundry is finally folded and stacked like a catalogue spread and say, out loud, "That looks nice." It means we set the table on a Tuesday with the good plates without needing a reason. We learned from those pages that dignity doesn't always require chandeliers. Often it asks for clean, a little shine, and a chair pulled out for someone else. We keep the ritual of comparing wants to weather. The book's not available in all areas, turned into our intuitive sense that not every year can hold every dream. We check the forecast of our lives before we buy beer or we're big. Are we moving? Are we saving? Are we caring for someone? Are we building something that needs quiet or noise? We accept that storms delay shipments and that illness delays plans, and in both cases the package is sweeter when it does arrive because we waited well. We keep the lesson that selection is identity in disguise. The old spreads weren't just a country of objects, they were a hall of mirrors where households recognized themselves. Are we a waffle family or a pancake family? Do we camp or do we read? Do we like stripes or is this a floral year? Now the questions sound different. Are we minimalists? Do we adopt strays? Do we fill our Saturdays with teams or trails? But choosing remains the way people say who they are without speeches. The house wears its answers quietly. We keep logistics as love language. The person who knows how to fit 3 boxes and a stroller into a trunk speaks a dialect the catalogue made useful. The one who remembers to order batteries with the toy filters with the vacuum, ribbon with the paper. This person is doing what the index once did, anticipating friction and smoothing it. When that person moves through the kitchen before a birthday and lays out scissors, trash bags, a permanent marker, and spare tape as if setting an altar, they are not being fussy, they're being fluent in family. We keep the sensitivity to images that respect our intelligence. The best pages never shouted, they trusted us to lean in. Now we prefer ads that don't yell, writing that doesn't condescend, photos that don't perform too much. We move toward the brands and the people who show their wares and their values with a steady hand, who photograph their apples with a bruise in the frame, who say wipes clean, but also list the material in case we care about what touches our skin. Respect became a taste we acquired and never lost. We keep the idea that a household is a small ongoing collaboration. The catalogue turned a room into a conference where everyone's vote mattered, even if the result was weighted gently by wisdom and paychecks. Now we run everything that way when we can. We ask kids what they think about the new bookshelf, not because they'll assemble it, but because they'll live with it. We ask elders how they feel about the heater setting, not because the thermostat is complicated, but because comfort is. People who grew up being included keep including. We keep the scent of certain months in our heads. There was a winter ink smell in those pages. Now we find it in cardboard and cinnamon and wool taken out of a storage bin. The brain remembers before the calendar does. It's time, someone says, and they don't have to say time for what. The drawer where the wrapping paper lives opens. The family playlist, once physically on a shelf as a stack of records, lives in an app and starts itself on the right song as if it has been taught. We keep our training in mercy for delays. The catalogue's postcards that said back-ordered turned out to be practice for all the ways life writes. We are running behind. We learn to improvise, not just gifts but meals, weekends, plans. We learn the dignity of IOUs that are honest, and the grace of receiving one without making the giver feel smaller. We learned how to narrate disappointment for children so it feels like a detour, not a dead end. We keep the little engineering of spectacle dad or mum did after the kids went to bed, armed with instructions and resolve because the morning would be better if the box were already a bike. Now we do it for each other. Install the curtain rods before the party, assemble the bookshelf before the semester starts, pre-charge the gadget so the first press of the button does something. Surprise is not only about secrecy, it's about readiness meeting joy. We keep the democratic wonder that a thing can come from far away because we asked politely and paid and waited, and arrive at our door, our exact door, with our name on it. That simple civic still moves us. It makes us patient with carriers in the rain. It makes us tidy our stoop and check the porch light. It reminds us we live inside a web of effort that includes the person who taped the corners and the person who drove past 1,000 mailboxes to find ours. We keep the habit of making lists that are really poems in disguise. Milk, rice, thread, light bulbs, that book about Wales, a birthday card for Aunt Joan written on the back of an envelope, is a lyric about a life. The catalogue trained us to appreciate inventory as literature, names and sizes and colours lined up like verses, and now we treat our own household inventory with a little reverence. We read it out loud on the way to the store and find somehow that we love each other better for hearing it. We keep the belief that a house can evolve by intention. The pages said a new blanket could change a room, and sometimes we believe them too literally, but the deeper lesson stuck. Choose a small thing carefully and a larger thing shifts. Now we hang a picture, put a plant by the sink, move a chair near the window, and we feel the day redistribute itself. We know this magic because a photograph taught us once that composition matters. We keep proof that ordinary families are excellent curators. Looking back at dog-eared pages and old boxes, we noticed that the things we circled most often were sturdy, useful, joyful, the opposite of foolish. That confidence helps when the world asks us to choose complicated things, schools, neighbourhoods, causes. We trust our taste because we practiced on pajamas and toys and made, for the most part, beautiful calls. We keep the sound of paper turning as a metronome for talk. Even when there is nothing to turn, the conversation retains that rhythm. Huh. Oh. Wait, go back, with silences elastic enough to hold thought. The people who grew up flipping together are good at letting someone else speak and then speaking in turn. They are skilled at pointing without poking, at inviting without insisting, at pausing on a page because someone's face says, "Not yet." We keep the lesson that seasons are not emergencies, they're invitations. The book never scolded you for being unready. It simply appeared, and you walked toward it when you could. That tone stays with us. When holidays arrive, we try to be more like those pages, available, generous with ideas, sparse with pressure. If it's a lean year, the circles get smaller and the stars more particular, and the feeling is still right because the ritual isn't about volume, it's about attention. We keep the memory of being seen by people who circled things for us, and we repay it by seeing others. We spot the friend who would love the second-hand coat. We set aside the book for the neighbour's kid who's suddenly into planets. We tuck extra cookies into the tin for the mail carrier. The generosity the catalogue facilitated, old-fashioned, transactional, and yet sincere, becomes the generosity we live, messier and more human, beyond any order form. We keep the idea that a household can be a quiet workshop of dreams. On winter nights, somebody still says, "Let's make a plan," and the room responds. The plan might be a vacation line by line, a budget that threads needles, a soup a child can help chop into being, a shelf to hold what the year has taught you. The tools are different now, the posture is not. The book is gone, but the bench remains, and the lamp still knows how to throw a circle of light exactly where the future comes together. Before we go, take a breath with me. The wish book may be gone, but that old posture remains, the circle at the table, the soft lamp, the patient kind of wanting we learned together. If a page, a toy, or a tiny ritual from tonight stirred something in you, tell me in the comments. What did you circle back then? And what do you circle now? Share your city or town too. I love seeing this little campfire glow from so many places. If this gentle walk through memory helped you unwind, tap like, subscribe and ring the bell so our next sleepy journey finds you when the day is finished. And if you know someone who once drew stars in the margins, pass this along. Maybe they'll feel the paper under their fingers again. Thank you for being here, truly. Fold the night down, straighten the blanket, and keep the good, simple rituals close. I'll meet you on the next page. Sleep well.